Have you ever wasted time and regretted it later? This is the story of a young man who learned the true value of time, and it just might change how you see your own life. Once upon a time, in a busy little village, there lived a young man named Smith. Smith was full of energy, but he was also careless. He spent most of his days chatting with his friends under the shade of trees, laughing and playing, instead of working or learning something useful. His father, an old and hard-working farmer, often warned him, "Smith, time is precious, like water in a river. Once it flows away, you can never bring it back. Use your time wisely." But Smith didn't listen. He would laugh and say, "Don't worry, father. I have plenty of time to do everything later." Life in the village kept moving. Farmers planted their crops, merchants sold goods in the market, and children attended school. Everyone worked hard to make their days count, except Smith. He continued to waste his time, thinking there was no rush. One day, a wealthy merchant arrived in the village. He was looking for workers to help build a large warehouse in the city. The merchant announced in the village square, "I will pay well for those who are ready to work hard. But I can only take a few people, so come quickly if you are interested." Hearing this, many villagers rushed to the merchant, eager for the opportunity. Smith's father called out to him, "Smith, this is your chance. Go and talk to the merchant now before it's too late." Smith yawned lazily and said, "I'll go later. There's no need to rush. He's not going anywhere." Instead of heading to the square, Smith wandered off to meet his friends. They spent the day laughing and talking, doing nothing important. By the time Smith finally decided to go and speak to the merchant, the sun was already setting. When he reached the merchant's tent, the merchant looked at him with a kind but firm expression and said, "I'm sorry, young man. I have already hired all the workers I need. There's no more work left." Smith was shocked. "But I thought there was still time," he said, his voice full of regret. The merchant shook his head and replied, "Time waits for no one. If you don't value it, you lose it." Feeling embarrassed and sad, Smith walked back home. His father saw him and said, "Now do you understand, my son? Time is more valuable than money. You can earn money again, but once time is gone, you can never get it back." Smith sat quietly, thinking about his father's words. For the first time, he realized how much time he had wasted. He made a promise to himself that from that day on, he would never take time for granted again. That evening, Smith couldn't sleep. His father's words echoed in his mind. Time is more valuable than money. He stared at the ceiling, thinking about all the hours, days, and even years he had wasted doing nothing important. A wave of regret washed over him. When the first rays of sunlight entered his room the next morning, Smith jumped out of bed. He walked outside and saw his father in the fields, already hard at work. Sweat dripped from his father's forehead as he dug into the soil with his hands, planting seeds carefully. Smith hesitated for a moment, feeling ashamed. But then he took a deep breath, walked up to his father, and said, "Father, I've wasted enough time. I want to help you. Please teach me." His father paused and looked at him with surprise. For a moment, he said nothing. Then a slow smile spread across his face. "It's never too late, my son," he said. "Come, I'll teach you everything you need to know." The work was much harder than Smith expected. The sun was blazing hot and his arms ached from digging. His soft hands quickly became rough and dirty from handling the tools. Sweat ran down his face, but Smith didn't stop. Each time he thought about giving up, he reminded himself of the opportunities he had missed because of his laziness. By midday, Smith was exhausted. His father noticed and said, "Why don't you take a rest?" But Smith shook his head. "No, father, I want to finish this." His father smiled again, this time with pride. "That's a spirit, my boy." As the sun set and the fields were finally planted, Smith sat under a tree, wiping his sweaty forehead. For the first time in years, he felt proud of himself. He hadn't wasted the day. He had worked hard and achieved something meaningful. Over the next few weeks, Smith's life completely changed. He woke up early every morning to help his father. He learned how to care for the crops, handle tools, and even manage the farm. He also spent time learning new skills from the village carpenter and merchant. Then one day, the wealthy merchant returned to the village. "I need strong workers to carry supplies to the city," the merchant announced. "The work is hard, but the pay is excellent." Without hesitation, Smith rushed to the merchant. "I'm ready," he said confidently. The merchant studied him for a moment and said, "Ah, I remember you. You were the one who came too late last time. Let's see if you've truly learned the value of time." Smith worked harder than he ever had before. He carried heavy bags of supplies, walked long distances, and didn't complain once. The merchant was impressed by his dedication. When the job was done, the merchant handed Smith a pouch of coins and said, "Well done, you've earned this." Smith returned home that night, holding the money in his hands. His father saw him and smiled with pride. "You've learned the most important lesson, my son," he said. "When you respect time, it rewards you." Smith nodded, feeling a sense of accomplishment he had never felt before. He knew he would never take time for granted again. The next morning, Smith woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time, he didn't need his father's voice to pull him out of bed. He dressed quickly, grabbed a loaf of bread, and ran outside, ready to tackle the day. In the fields, his father was already working. The sun hadn't risen fully, but Smith could see the determination on his father's face. Without a word, Smith picked up a hoe and started digging beside him. His father glanced at him, pretending to be surprised. "Back again so soon? I thought yesterday was just a one-time thing." Smith smiled, wiping his brow. "I have a lot of time to make up for, father." The days that followed were not easy. Smith's muscles ached from hours of digging, planting, and watering the fields. His friends teased him for spending so much time working. "Why are you working so hard, Smith?" they laughed. "Come sit under the tree with us like old times." But Smith shook his head. "You go ahead. I have more important things to do now." As the weeks passed, Smith noticed something incredible. The tiny seeds he had planted with his father began to sprout. Green shoots pushed through the soil, reaching toward the sun. He felt a deep sense of pride as he watched the crops grow taller and stronger each day. One afternoon, while Smith was watering the fields, he heard the sound of horses' hooves approaching. He turned and saw the wealthy merchant from before riding into the village with his caravan of goods. The villagers gathered around as the merchant climbed down from his horse. "I need workers to help carry supplies to the city," the merchant announced. "The journey is long and the work is hard, but those who join me will be well rewarded." Smith didn't hesitate. He dropped his tools and ran toward the merchant. "Sir, I'll work for you," he said confidently. The merchant raised an eyebrow. "Ah, you again," he said, recognizing Smith. "Last time you were too late. Have you finally learned to value time?" Smith nodded. "Yes, sir, I've learned my lesson. I'm ready to work hard." The merchant studied him for a moment before nodding. "Very well, be at the village square at sunrise tomorrow. Don't be late." The next day, Smith arrived early, eager to prove himself. The work was harder than anything he had done before. He carried heavy sacks of goods, walked for miles under the scorching sun, and helped the caravan navigate tricky paths. Despite the challenges, he never complained or gave up. When the journey ended, the merchant handed Smith a heavy pouch of coins. "You've done well," he said. "You've earned this." Smith returned home, tired but happy. His father greeted him with a proud smile. "Now you see, my son, that hard work and valuing your time always pay off." Smith nodded. "I'll never waste another moment, father." From that day onward, Smith's life changed completely. He was no longer the lazy young man who wasted his time under the shade of trees. Instead, he became someone the entire village admired. Word spread quickly about how Smith had worked hard for the wealthy merchant and earned a handsome reward. The villagers began to notice his transformation. "Have you seen Smith lately?" they whispered. "He's like a new person, always working hard and full of energy." Smith didn't stop there. With the money he earned, he bought better tools for his father to use on the farm. He even saved some coins to invest in learning a new skill. In his free time, he visited the village carpenter and asked to be taught how to make simple furniture. "Why do you want to learn this?" the carpenter asked, curious. "Because time is precious," Smith replied. "The more I learn, the more I can do with the time I have." The carpenter smiled and agreed to teach him. Soon, Smith was not only helping his father in the fields, but also crafting small wooden stools and chairs to sell in the market. One sunny morning, as Smith was loading freshly harvested crops into a cart, the wealthy merchant returned to the village once again. This time, he wasn't looking for workers. Instead, he approached Smith directly. "Smith, I've been watching you," the merchant said. "You've changed a lot since the first time we met. I'm impressed by your hard work and dedication. I need someone reliable to manage my warehouse in the city. Are you interested?" Smith was stunned. "Me? Manage your warehouse?" The merchant nodded. "Yes, you've proven yourself to be responsible and trustworthy. It's a big job, but I believe you're ready for it." Smith took a moment to think. This was the opportunity of a lifetime. He looked at his father, who was standing nearby, smiling with pride. "Thank you, sir," Smith said, his voice steady. "I'll do my best." The merchant placed a firm hand on Smith's shoulder. "Good. Come to the city next week, and we'll get started." As the merchant walked away, Smith turned to his father. "I couldn't have done this without you, father. You were right all along. Time is the most valuable thing we have." His father patted him on the back. "You've learned an important lesson, my son. Use your time wisely, and you can achieve anything." Smith went on to manage the merchant's warehouse successfully, earning respect and admiration from everyone around him. But he never forgot his humble beginnings or the lesson that had changed his life. Time, once lost, can never be regained. Use it wisely. This story reminds us all that time is the most precious gift we have. Don't let it slip away. How do you plan to make the most of your time today? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring English stories that help you improve your listening and speaking skills. Let's make every moment count.